Not quite sure where I left off, but I think I was talking something about the being handler of ponies, where children would be brought out to the location and could walk around a path within which the ponies were there, and it was all fenced in. There was a dairy on the corner, and I think I worked there for a while also. And maybe the dairy and the ponies, I think, were owned by the same individual. For those people who didn't want to come to the ponies, when they had many of the folks who had a couple more nickels than we did, wanted to have a birthday party or some such thing, we would put the ponies in a trailer and take them to a location. And I remember distinctly one location up on Main Street, if you're going east, just before you get to the 290, and before you get to what used to be the Lord Amherst, I'm not sure what it is. There was a street there very much pillared on either side of the road, a very large home right there on the corner, where we were able to, because there was a birthday party, take the ponies there, put some stakes in the ground, and figure out some kind of a path to put the kiddies on the horse, and then holding on to the bridle, march the ponies around, and the little children had a wonderful time. This was, I guess, my first exposure to, let's say, the upper class, or people who had more money than I did, or we did. And it was called, I think it was called a pony holiday or something like that. There was sure no holiday for the ponies. And it was usually a hot day. And of course, the hotter the day, the more people wanted to come out to the boulevard and Sheridan and have their kiddies ride on the ponies, and marching around there in obviously older clothes, and picking up the road apples afterwards was all part of the job. And I don't know what I was paid, but again, it was Mom's upbringing and thriftiness and whatever no, let's not use that. Her desire to keep, number one, her boys busy, and number two, to put a couple nickels in their pocket. As I alluded to or said earlier, my mother used to love to go down and visit with her mother, and did quite often. And in so doing, so that she wouldn't have to be home at 3:30 when the bus arrived, she would leave, much to the consternation of my father, she would leave play clothes in the garage. And when we got home, there was a great distinction between school clothes and play clothes, because she knew we'd be out in the fields or climbing the trees or doing whatever, and didn't want us to spoil our school clothes. So we'd have to change our clothes out in the garage, be it hot or be it cold. I think my parents had long arguments about this procedure, but nevertheless, my mother succeeded in doing what she wanted to do. God bless Dad. God bless both of them. Another one of my mother's activities for her sons, and I know that I did this, and I suspect David did when he reached a certain age. I don't know whether Doug did, because 9 years, let's see, Doug would have been 9 years old when I was 18 and went away to college, so my connection with Doug was minimal. so I don't know a lot of what his activities were. Somehow, and again through a connection or whatever it may be, I don't know, my mother made arrangements, maybe through a friend of Dad's or whatever it may have been, on Elmwood Avenue, from almost Kenmore Avenue to Amherst Street. There were a number of foundries, and this was early in the Second World War, so in the early 40s, when I was 10, 11, 12 maybe. My mother arranged with the owners of these foundries that had, some of them were right between around Hurdle. And my mother made arrangements with, my mother or father made arrangements with the owner of the factories, and they had parking lots right in front of the buildings that butted up against, close to where the foundry was. Well, if you've ever been close to or seen pictures of somebody working in a foundry like at Bethlehem Steel or wherever it might be, you can imagine how, on a hot summer day, how hot that must have been. Well, my mother made arrangements not only with the owners or managers of these foundries to allow us to come into the parking lot, previously having gone to the corner of Kensington and Main Street, where there was a dairy who made Skippy cups. You know what I'm referring to. Skippy cup with a little wooden spoon, and I think the Skippy cups sold for like a nickel. And I think my mother probably made arrangements to buy them, probably for 4 cents or 4.5, whatever. And I don't recall all the details of the financial part of it at this point. But we'd go out there, we'd buy chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, and put them in insulated containers, probably as tall as I was. They're probably standing 4 feet tall and maybe a 1.5 feet or 2 feet wide. But they were a job to lug around. I remember that. And they'd put dry ice in there, and my mother would pay for the ice cream, and we would then hike over to Elmwood Avenue, pull in the parking lot, and I'd get these things out, and I'd go up against a chain link fence, and these poor men who were inside would see me. I don't think it took too long for them to understand that I was there peddling ice cream. And over they would come, and some of them would say, "How much, a dime? I could get this for a nickel someplace else." Well, they couldn't go out, leave work, and go get it, so they paid a dime. So I would imagine we made 100% profit or more on these selling the ice cream, and of course on occasions we'd run out of the favorite flavor, whichever flavor it was. So we would adjust our subsequent purchases, but I don't recall now how often we did it, whether we did it every day, whether we did it twice a week or 3 times a week. But my mother, who was a great knitter and sewer and what have you, would sit there and what have you, would sit there in the car with the doors open so the breeze could blow through, because I don't think we had any air conditioning at that time, or not in our car anyhow. And she'd sit there knitting whatever she knit while I was peddling the ice cream. Whatever happened to the money, I don't have any idea. Probably put in my bank account. Don't remember how much or what kind or what happened to it or anything else along that line. Just remember the activity. I know that David did it subsequently, and as I say, I don't know whether Doug got involved in it or not. This dairy and pony ride complex type of thing was right where Denny's is now on Niagara Falls Boulevard. And behind there was the dairy, which is now Consumers Beverages, right in that particular area. On another occasion, and I think this was when David might have been 9 years old and I maybe 12 years old. My mother, who was still very active in the Plymouth Methodist Church, either as a money-making effort or just entertainment, planned what they called a Tom Thumb wedding. Well, this was big in those days, things like this, and I think it had been for either in other institutions or at churches, but nevertheless, a lot of the women who my mother knew from church were also connected through the Masonic order. Many of them belonged to the same Masonic lodge or a Masonic lodge. They were very, very active. This Tom Thumb wedding, again, where there's pictures of it downstairs, David was designated as the best man. Well, David had a tuxedo. I'm sure the, quote, bride, unquote, had a wedding dress, and there were all kinds of attendants and ushers and an organist and whatever no, let's not go there. All the trappings and the flowers and the whole schmear. And because of my involvement in the choir, I, in my tuxedo, had to get up in front and sing "Oh, Promise Me" as part of the wedding ceremony. And the place was packed, as I remember. And as maybe, I'm not sure whether my part, my singing of the "Oh, Promise Me" was before the ceremony or after the ceremony. But nevertheless, the pianist or the organist played the introduction, which I had been practicing and been coached on and was, I thought, ready to go. And the organist or the pianist played the introduction and then started playing the beginning of "Oh, Promise Me." And I stood there mute. Well, a lot of pointing of fingers and whispering and "Donald, get ready." And then the pianist would start over again, play the introduction, and finally, I think I was so struck dumb by standing there with all these people out in front of me. I finally, on the second go-round, I did sing the song, and I guess I must have had a fairly good voice before it changed. But I thought you might get a kick out of that. The folks' social life, as I said, revolved somewhat around church, somewhat around Masonic Lodge. The ladies, the members' wives, would, because I think they met every 2 weeks on a Friday night down on Jefferson Avenue, and the ladies would come with their husbands, and the husbands would go upstairs to the lodge meeting and do their thing. And the ladies became very close, became very social, down in the kitchen, preparing some kind of a snack or more than the men needed to eat down in the kitchen. So they became very close, and it was just another function in social gathering. After looking at some of my notes that I've made regarding this dissertation, I do recall also, again, I'm sure through my mother's prodding, I sold subscriptions to magazines, probably Time, Life, Ladies' Home Journal, things along that line, for which I would be paid either in kind. I could order a magazine myself, or I'd get a camera. But I can remember going door to door selling magazines, not only in our own neighborhood, but also at sunset when we'd go up there. I'm sure, in addition, was excuse me, the Saturday Evening Post and Cosmopolitan and magazines of that nature. I do remember very vividly when we were at Sunset Bay, there was Burkhart's Pavilion, where in the back they had tables and a bar for beer. I don't think they had anything hard. It was just beer. In the front part, they had a counter where those people who came to the beach and paid to park and then came inside for a nickel, a dime, a quarter, whatever, they could, and they brought their bathing suit, and instead of, don't think changing in the car was a thing that was allowed, but they would come into the building, which had a ice cream and soda bar up in the front, along with those little nickel machines that you could put in and play various games. But they also had a counter where you could rent a basket for whatever, some coin, and go into a private changing room, just as they would in a department store where you could change clothes or try on something. Put your clothes and valuables in this basket, come back out, and they'd give you a tag that you could, with a number on it, or wrap around your wrist, and then go for a swim. Come back in, dry off, give them your ticket back, and be able to go in the changing room again, take your suit off, put your clothes back on, and after having you spend a nice day at the beach and swimming, unlike some seashore spots where you could rent a little gazebo down by the water. Burkharts were a very, very organized group. There was the parents. There was a son who was my age. They also had out on the, right in front of the pavilion, a merry-go-round. They had a parking lot, and I don't know whether they charged to park or not. They probably earned enough money with the people coming inside and doing whatever. And there was a great big long porch on the front of the pavilion, between the pavilion and the merry-go-round. And the merry-go-round used to go and go and go and go and go, and I was never old enough to be the operator of it. But because Donald Burkhart and myself were close friends, I could ride it any time I wanted to. And about this time I was starting to notice that there was another group of people that didn't have stems on their bladder. Girls. Nevertheless, on occasions I'd be sitting on the front porch, or a group of us would be just hanging out, and I'd see some poor devil get up and he'd have some coins to go in, or give some coins to his children to go in and get an ice cream cone, or And son of a gun if he didn't drop the coin, and it fell down through a probably quarter-inch crack or between the boards on the porch. Well, this struck a bell in my head, and I think another friend and I, or maybe even David, I don't recall, decided that the next morning we'd get up early and we'd come down and crawl underneath the porch with all of the spiders and everything else that were down there. We finally learned how to get rid of them by just taking a cloth or something, or an old broom. Well, let me tell you, that digging around in that sand underneath the porch was like a gold mine. Because for a long, long time, people had been coming out there, had been dropping coins through the cracks in the floor. And so, whoever it was, either a friend of mine and or David, we got an old screen, and we'd sit there and we'd shovel sand into the screen and then sift the sand through the screen, and there were these coins that we'd load up into our pockets. And I think we did this until we were either caught doing it or told not to do it anymore or some such thing. So we'd either come late at, well, no, not late, very early in the morning. But it was another source of making a couple coins. Another family at Sunset by the name of Carrolls. Stu Carroll was my age. They lived in Buffalo, and he went to school in Buffalo, but they had a cottage right there on the corner. And he and I would hang out together, he and I and a bunch of other, there was another fellow by the name of Dick Stone, whose father owned I think it was Buffalo Awning, or I believe it was up Buffalo Awning. They had a cottage up there right off of Cattaraugus Creek, and they had a speedboat, a crisscross, and on occasion Stoney and I, he'd say, "Come on, Don, let's go. We'll go for a ride in the crisscross." Well, again, to a kid who had nothing, riding around in Lake Erie in a crisscross was something else. Enjoyed it very much. Stoney, I think, was a year ahead of me in high school. He went on and lived and worked in, as I think, a commercial artist in Syracuse. Married a classmate of mine, year behind him, Nancy Lubeck, and so we see each other every 5 years when he comes back for a reunion to attend with his wife Nancy. Also, while at Sunset, for some silly reason, I was very susceptible to poison ivy. And when we had the cottage, on either side of the cottage the cottage was set down lower than it was street level, but there were, because of the blowing and whatever have you, there were sand hills on either side of the cottage where we had to, every time we came out there in the springtime, had to shovel the devil out of the sand to get it away from the house. But also, among the trees that were on either side was poison ivy. Well, on one occasion, I got poison ivy big time. I had it all over my body. I was a basket case. I lay there with calamine lotion, I mean, all over everything. It was very painful to sit, to stand, to walk, to lay, to do anything. I really got a dose. I was very susceptible to it. I think, as a last measure, I think Dad took me into town and they gave me a shot, which helped to dissipate the effects of the poison ivy. I had it in my eyelids, my nostrils, my mouth, my ears, my privates, Mother Goose. Was I a sad case? But I think the shot did away with it. Maybe I'll mention more about that when I was at summer camp between 50 and 51, or 51 and 52, down in North Carolina. Talk to you more later. Again, bouncing around, but when we would go over to visit Jenny Perkins, when I was a adolescent and or I don't think early teen, but maybe 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, something like that. We would go over to visit Grandma, and one of the enjoyable things was a couple blocks away around the corner on Connecticut Street or wherever, excuse me, there was a movie theater. And on Saturday, for a nickel or a dime or whatever it was, we could go to the movie theater and see, Roy Rogers or a shoot-'em-up Western with the cartoons. And because it was the West Side, so that was very enjoyable. We looked forward to that on Saturday afternoon. Also, while we were there were a lot of Italian folks on the West Side, and some of the kids next door, I think it was the Badamis, would invite me to have lunch or dinner with them while we were there, because they were very good friends with Jenny Perkins. So we'd play for a while out in the back, or play ball or catch or do whatever. And on one occasion, I can distinctly remember it. It wasn't the last, but it was the first, where I was invited to stay for dinner, lunch, or I guess it was dinner. Well, we went in, and the first thing I noticed was in the middle of the table was a very large, I can't call it a loaf of bread because it wasn't. It was almost like rolls that were all baked together. And so when anybody wanted some bread, all they did was reach in the middle and rip a piece off. And it turned out to be like a roll. Well, we then were served a salad. And then we had spaghetti. Well, there was chicken, there was meatballs, there might have been ribs, but it was just endless. These courses kept coming, and people kept eating, because it was a very large dining room with, or kitchen, I can't recall which, that'll make a difference, where the whole family was sitting around, and relatives and everybody came to eat, and I was there to eat too. But they had endless. They had like macaroni. They had all kinds of pastas, the sauces, as I say, the meat and the chicken and the sausage, and well, my eyes bugged out, and I did a pretty good job, I think, of finishing up my plate as it kept getting added to. And then I think there was some kind of dessert, probably some kind of Italian dessert. Well, can you imagine when I got home, or next door to Grandma's house, and told my mother, you're not going to believe what I just went through. Why is it that they eat like that and we don't eat like that? We don't have 4 or 5 courses or multiple choices of entrees, because we had a meat and a potato and a vegetable and maybe a salad and maybe a dessert, but I was just absolutely flabbergasted, and thought a great deal of these folks next door, and was not hesitant about, when Mom said it was time to go and visit Grandma, was not hesitant at all. Between movies and food, I was in heaven. I must also mention that during my adolescent and 10, 11, 12, even early teens, there obviously was not television. And the only entertainment, per se, in the house was listening to the radio. Well, when Linda and I were down in Florida, 04, 05, winter, the complex where we stayed had not only the 750 of these double wides and 2 pools and excuse me, a community room, shuffleboard, golf course, anything and everything. A big kitchen in this community room where they had dances and parties and breakfasts and whatever have you. And they also had a library. Well, I'm not a big fiction person. I'm more of a nonfiction person, historical and the like. And I took out a number of books and read, as I often like to do before I go to sleep, or on a rainy day. Well, a couple of the books down there caught my attention. One was Burns and Allen. Well, it's an old vaudevillian comedy team. George Burns, who lived till 100, and you guys are probably very familiar with George Burns and his portrayal in God and other movies. But nevertheless, what it did when I was reading these books, they mentioned some of the old-time radio shows. And it was very difficult because I'm laying there in bed reading these and knowing full well that by the morning I will have forgotten them. So I'm jumping up and down and finally put a pad next to my bed so that when I read, knowing full well that I was going to do this taping, that it was just a reminder of the radio shows that we listened to as youngsters. We'd gather around the radio in the living room and listen to what are now soap operas on television, but these were kind of radio soap operas. And not only the comedians but also other shows had very clever dialogue, had very clever plots, made people my age and older, all of them too, I'm sure, use their own imaginations because they had sound effects people who could go clippity-clop with whatever equipment, or gunshots, or zing when an arrow was shot, or it was just very cleverly done. And there were people like, as I said, Burns and Allen. You probably aren't familiar with Gracie Allen, but she was quite a comedian. And I jotted some of these things down. There was Amos and Andy, which was a delightful black comedy show. There was the Lone Ranger. There was Laurel and Hardy. Well, Lone Ranger and Tonto, and Laurel and Hardy, and Fred Allen, who was quite a comedian. Will Rogers, who was a political satirist and great comedian in his own right. Fibber McGee and Molly. Fibber McGee's closet, every time he'd go to the closet and open it up, where you'd hear this clanging and everything falling out, because everything he had was jammed in this closet. Jack Benny. There was Superman. There was Dick Tracy. There was the Shadow. The Shadow Nose, and all of this. Bob Hope. A great deal of the shows, unlike television, where it's all displayed for you, you would sit there, and in your own fashion, imagine, you could use your imagination and picture all these things that were occurring over the radio. It was delightful. I think young people nowadays don't have the capability because everything is shown to them in black and white or color or whatever it might be, but don't have to use their imagination at all. I do also recall that we had, I'm sure in some of the theaters that I've mentioned earlier, but more definitive in the Palace, which was down on Main Street, down near where the old Marine building was. It was called the Palace, and they had vaudevillians down there, and comedians, fairly scantily dressed, and also a striptease person. We do recall as a young teenager going down there with some of my friends, Dwayne Perry, who I was very close to and has moved away to Michigan, but we still stay in touch. He and his brother Bob and Joe Newfer. These were all people who moved to Woodland Avenue because they came from the Indianapolis area with General Motors to work in management over at Chevrolet, and they were here for 7 or 8 years, something like that, during my high school period. And Dwayne left a year before we graduated. But nevertheless, and I do remember young Joe Newfer, who, sitting in the balcony and seeing these comedians and vaudevillians doing their thing, and these girls coming out in very scantily dresses and or doing a strip. Well, how do I say this graciously? He became so excited that he, sitting there in the audience, I guess he had never experienced this before, he had an orgasm. And had become so excited, and he really was embarrassed afterwards. He didn't know what to do or how to handle it. God bless Joe. I do recall you guys, Don especially, and maybe Paul, riding your bikes down Sheridan Drive and up over the Grand Island Bridge because you were going to go to Beaver Island. Well, we had something similar, but we didn't go as far. We could ride our bikes down Niagara Falls Boulevard, right where beyond Ellicott Creek. Just beyond Ellicott Creek is where the Tonawanda Creek and the Ellicott, well, they all come together, the canal. I have never, in 75 years, been able to figure out the route of the water down there and what's Tonawanda Creek and what's the canal and what's, I just don't know. But nevertheless, we would ride our bikes down there, and there was as you turn left before you get to Robinson Road, big parking lot there where some of the nurseries are now. Behind in there was, let's say it's the Tonawanda Creek. Well, they had great big overhanging trees, and we would ride down there and either have in our bathing suits or take our bathing suits. And somebody ingeniously had rigged up a rope where we could swing from another large branch and or from the ground, get a running start and swing out over the water and drop down into the creek. Great fun. A lot of friends that we did that with. As long as we're in my late adolescence or early teens, in 1941, when the Second World War started, my dad, being the conscientious person that he was one of the first to volunteer, too old to go in the service, but he volunteered to become a fire warden. Well, back in those days, we didn't know whether the Japanese or the Germans were going to come over and bomb and do us harm. We had fire wardens. They had their white hats with the some emblem on the front. They had armbands. They had a first aid kit. You guys may have remembered it. It was a black thing that had everything from soup to nuts in it. Down in my basement, it was in our basement, we were instructed to, water was no good for incendiary bombs, which we thought, in prevention they might use. So we had buckets of sand up in the attic of the garage. We had my dad's raincoat and hard hat and badges and armbands and whatever have you that after the war we still had down there, and I think during the war we played with. But he was, going back to the to the radio, you may have heard something about FDR and fireside chats. Yes, we would sit there on, I believe it was a Sunday night, and we'd listen to assurances from Franklin Delano Roosevelt that there was nothing to fear but fear itself, and he was a great PR president. He was trying to rebuild the country and get people to have confidence in, and had many work programs that got people off the dole welfare. So that was one of the other things that we looked forward to and listened to. During the Second World War, what you and I know today as oleomargarine in various stages of saturated fat, right, Larry? Whatever I got has very little of it, Larry. You'd be proud of me. But nevertheless, there he goes again. During the war, when various items, be it gas, be it tires that were all rationed, be it food, be it meat, be it eggs, be it everything was rationed, so you had to make do with what you had. But anyhow, oleomargarine came in what we would know today as probably a quarter-gallon container that was all white. And inside of it was a little marble-size capsule that was yellow. And what you had to do while you were listening to the radio, or Mom would get us to do it, we'd sit there listening to the radio or doing whatever, and we would squeeze through this plastic bag, puncture the little yellow marble type thing, and then knead the oleomargarine to equally distribute this yellow coloring throughout the white, almost looks like lard, maybe it was, to make it look like a substitute for butter or oleomargarine. There was a lot of rationing during the Second World War, things that were designated for the war effort, rubber. We even, if Mom would cook a bacon or something like that, and there was bacon fat, we would save the bacon fat and let it cool in a jar or can or whatever, and turn it in, so that the glycerin, I guess, from the pork, the fat, could be used to make something, whatever it might be. And if I have enough left here on the tape, I'll tell you that, I'll keep talking and tell you that somewhere in the mid-40s was when I went to, left Lincoln Elementary and went to number one, the junior high school, which was on Delaware Road, which is now Kenmore Middle, and then for the next 3 years to Kenmore High School, which is at the corner of Delaware Road and Highland, which you folks know as Kenmore West. It was known as Kenmore then because Kenmore East did not exist. I may or may not be going into greater detail than you even wanted to know, but I I'll record this. You can do with it what you please. If you listen to it and get some information and or a chuckle or two, or knowledge about your parents, grandparents, and beyond, then fine and dandy. For those that are interested, fine. For those that want to skip over certain parts of it, I've tried to go chronologically so that went from the 19th century to the 20th century, and various stops in between grandparents and parents, and some of the activities and things that we did or didn't do. I'm going to try and keep going till this tape stops. I could sing you a song, or recite the Lord's Prayer, or the Pledge of Allegiance, or something along that line, but all the singing I did was when I was about 12 years old down at Plymouth Methodist Church, and so I think my voice has changed, and my attitude has changed. And that little thing keeps going around and around and around. Boy, it looks like it's at the end, but you must have bought some good tapes, Larry. These are good. These are good. They go on even beyond what it looks like they finished. I wish I had some of these things done, Larry, so that you could take it with you on your drive to Indiana and get what